The air in the house is still. It's a quiet kind of stillness, the kind that falls after too many moments of not being said. I hear it when I lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. The hum of the house, the sound of a life lived together. There's comfort in it, yes. But lately, there's something else too. A distance I can't quite explain, but one I feel in the spaces between us. It's strange how silence can feel like a weight pressing down on you, isn't it? How, at some point, it's not the noise of a relationship that drowns you, but the absence of it. The words we don't say. The gestures that go unnoticed. The intimacy that once existed between us now feels like a distant memory, a faint shadow that flickers on the edges of my mind. I look at him sometimes, trying to see him as I used to. I remember the way he used to make me laugh, the way he held me at night, the way his presence brought a warmth into the house. But now, it's like I'm looking at a stranger. He doesn't notice the quiet tension between us, or if he does, he chooses not to acknowledge it. It's not his fault. How could it be? He's a good man. He's kind, dependable, everything I ever needed. But something inside me has changed. It started with the little things, the things I couldn't put my finger on at first. The moments when his touch felt like it belonged to someone else, when his voice no longer brought comfort but a coldness that made me pull away. At first, I blamed myself. I thought I was being unreasonable, that I was overthinking everything. But then, I met him. It happened unexpectedly, like most things that change our lives. We were at a dinner with friends, the kind where the conversation ebbs and flows, where you laugh and share small talk and pretend everything is fine. And then I saw him, standing just outside the circle, with eyes that seemed to catch mine with a pull that felt almost magnetic. I didn't think much of it at first. He was charming, yes, and there was something about the way he spoke that made me listen. But I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was married, after all. I had a life, a history, a commitment. But then we spoke. And when we did, it was like I'd been awakened from a long, unconscious slumber. The conversation was easy, effortless, like we had known each other far longer than the few moments we had shared. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, maybe even years. And when he looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, someone who was interested in me, truly interested. Not just in the roles I played, not just as a wife or a mother, but as a woman. Someone who saw me as more than just a part of a routine. I was embarrassed by how much it thrilled me. How easily I fell into him, without even realizing what I was doing. And as the evening wore on, I could feel the shift inside me. A part of me wanted to step back, wanted to stop it before it went any further. But another part, an unspoken part, was leaning in, craving something more. I told myself it was nothing. Just a fleeting connection, a moment of attention. It wasn't important, I convinced myself. But then the next time we met, it wasn't just a passing moment. It was something more, a conversation that stretched longer than it should have, laughter that lingered in the air, a look that meant something without words. That was when I felt the first crack. The first tremor beneath the surface of my life. Something deep inside me stirred, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight it or embrace it. I tried to ignore it. I did. I returned home that night, kissed my husband goodnight, and lay beside him in the dark. I listened to the sound of his breathing and tried to forget the way I felt in that moment, as if I were standing on the edge of something I couldn't name. It wasn't until I closed my eyes that the guilt washed over me, but even then, there was something else lingering. A spark I couldn't extinguish. The crack was there. The first crack in the foundation of everything I had once believed in. But I didn't know it yet. Not fully. Not until it was too late. It was easier than I had imagined, this slow descent into something I wasn't sure I wanted, but couldn't stop. After that first meeting, I thought about him more often than I should have. I told myself it was harmless, a fleeting connection, nothing more than a distraction. But my thoughts kept drifting back to him, his voice, his smile, the way his eyes seemed to understand things I hadn't spoken aloud in years. I tried to ignore it, to shove it back down, to bury it under layers of routine and daily life. After all, I had a life, a family. I had responsibilities, commitments. I didn't have time for this. But that didn't stop the thoughts from coming. The longing, the curiosity, the need to be seen. Every morning, I kissed my husband goodbye, telling myself it was just another day in the rhythm of our existence. He had become so predictable in his kindness, so steady in his routine. It was the same pattern, day in and day out. I felt like a passenger in my own life, watching everything unfold with a sense of detachment. The way he smiled at me over breakfast, asking how I'd slept. The way he rubbed my shoulders at night, unaware that something inside me had already begun to drift. It was the silence that spoke the loudest. The absence of anything more than surface-level interactions. The small conversations, the polite gestures. I didn't want to complain. I knew that, at its core, our relationship was not bad. But it wasn't alive anymore. And that was a truth I couldn't deny. When he wasn't looking, I caught myself reaching for my phone, glancing at the text messages from him. The man I had met. The man who seemed to know exactly what to say. His words were a balm to the part of me that had been neglected for so long. Every text, every message, felt like a little spark of warmth in an otherwise cold world. The messages weren't inappropriate. They were friendly, innocent, nothing to worry about. But each word wrapped around me, twisting itself into a comforting, dangerous embrace. He asked how I was doing, if I was finding joy in the little things, if I remembered to take care of myself. It felt like a delicate dance, one I knew I shouldn't be participating in but couldn't stop. I wasn't falling for him, I told myself. Not really. It was just something different. Something I hadn't experienced in so long. But when he asked to meet again, I didn't hesitate. I should have. I should have told him no, told myself no, and walked away. But there was a part of me, something desperate, something lonely, that wanted to feel that spark again. We met in a quiet cafe on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place where no one knew your name. The kind of place where you could disappear into the crowd, into the anonymity of the world. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table by the window, his gaze meeting mine before I could even say a word. We spoke of trivial things at first. The weather, the news, anything but what lingered between us. But there was a tension in the air, palpable, like an unspoken promise. I could feel it in the way he looked at me, the way his voice softened when he spoke. Every glance seemed to linger just a second too long, every laugh just a bit too intimate. And then, he reached across the table. Just a small gesture. His hand brushed mine, the touch light but electric. I pulled my hand back instinctively, but it was too late. That simple act, the one I had convinced myself I could resist, had already ignited something within me. I felt a heat rise to my cheeks, a flutter in my chest. I was too aware of him now, too aware of the way I felt, the way my pulse quickened when I looked at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between us was heavy with the unspoken truth. There was something here. Something that neither of us could ignore. But still, I told myself it wasn't anything. It was just a moment, just a touch, nothing more. I was in control. I was safe. Yet, as I walked away from that cafe, the weight of my own desires pressed heavily on my chest. I wasn't sure if I was falling into something I couldn't escape, or if I was simply seeking something that had been missing for too long. The world around me felt suddenly too loud, too full of reminders that I had a life to return to. A life that no longer felt like mine. The days that followed that second meeting felt like a blur, each one stretching into the next, filled with a hollow sense of confusion. It was as if a crack had appeared in the foundation of my life, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I could see the edges widening, the space between us growing larger. Between me and him. It was supposed to be just a fleeting thing, something that would burn itself out. I had convinced myself that I was simply curious, seeking some kind of validation in a world where I felt invisible, unnoticed. But with each passing day, I began to realize how much I was lying to myself. The truth was there, staring me in the face, and it was terrifying. I was no longer the woman I had been. The quiet evenings at home, the moments I once found comforting, had started to feel suffocating. Mark would talk about his day, recounting things that no longer seemed to matter to me. I nodded, offered a smile, and pretended to listen, but inside, I was somewhere else, somewhere with him. I had already stopped looking at my husband the way I used to, as though a veil had been drawn over my eyes. What once felt like safety now felt like stagnation, and I couldn't find my way back. And then there were the texts. It started small. Innocent exchanges, funny memes, passing comments about the weather, the kind of things two people would send without a second thought. But as the days went on, the messages became more personal. The tone shifted from casual pleasantries to something more intimate. He would ask how I was feeling, how my day was going, what I thought about when I had quiet moments to myself. There was an unspoken understanding in his words that made me feel seen, not just as a wife, a mother, a caretaker, but as me. Just me. It was intoxicating. I had stopped deleting the messages. I started keeping them, reading them over and over when no one was around, feeling a thrill of excitement each time my phone buzzed with a new notification. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. Not when every text felt like a lifeline. Not when I found myself craving the next one, looking forward to the next exchange like a breath of air after being submerged underwater. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the living room, Mark turned to me, his voice low, hesitant. "You seem distant," he said, eyes searching mine as if trying to understand a riddle he couldn't quite solve. "Is everything all right?" I froze. In that moment, I could have told him the truth. I could have confessed, told him about the loneliness, about the conversations that had begun to fill the spaces he once occupied, about the way I had let someone else slip into my heart, without ever meaning for it to happen. But I didn't. Instead, I offered him the most convincing smile I could muster. "I'm fine," I said, the words feeling like they belonged to someone else. "Just tired." He accepted it, as I knew he would, and turned back to his book, leaving me in a silence that felt deeper than before. I had lied, and I hated myself for it. But there was no turning back now. The divide between us was widening, and the more I tried to patch it up, the more it tore. I don't remember when I first thought it was going to happen. Maybe it was when I started to look for excuses, tiny reasons to leave the house for longer periods of time, just a walk, just a trip to the store, just a few more minutes away from everything. Or maybe it was when the laughter we shared, over trivial things, felt like it was something I couldn't get enough of. What I do remember is the heaviness that settled in my chest when I knew there would be no going back after tonight. It was a cool evening, one of those nights that felt almost too perfect, too easy. The sky was dark but not quite black, a deep navy that promised the stillness of the night to come. I had told Mark that I was going to meet a friend for dinner, a simple lie, one I'd used before. It wasn't even hard. I wasn't afraid of the lie anymore. I found myself standing at the front door, my hand resting on the knob, hesitating. The truth was, I didn't need to meet him. I didn't need to leave. But there was a magnetic pull, something I couldn't explain but knew I couldn't resist. I turned the key, stepping into the night. When I reached the spot we had agreed on, he was already there, leaning casually against the side of the cafe, his gaze lifting when he saw me. His eyes lit up with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. His smile, easy and confident, felt like it was made just for me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seen. And not just that. I felt like I mattered. We didn't talk much at first. He simply took my hand in his, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. And for me, it felt like it was. There was something about the way his fingers entwined with mine, something that anchored me to him in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We walked in silence, the city streets humming around us, the world oblivious to what was unfolding. I should have stopped. I should have told him to turn back, to go home before things went too far. But in that moment, I didn't want to. I wanted to keep walking, to see where it would lead. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the thrill. Maybe it was the emptiness inside me that he seemed to fill so effortlessly. Maybe it was because I was tired of pretending, tired of living a life that no longer felt real. As we turned down a quiet street, his hand still holding mine, he stopped and turned to face me. His gaze was softer now, but there was still that edge, that burning desire in his eyes. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low and almost like a whisper. But I knew what he meant. He was giving me a choice. But how could I say no when everything in me screamed yes? I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I stepped closer, and in that moment, the world around us seemed to fall away. There was nothing but us. No husband, no children, no responsibilities, just the desire, the need for something more. And in the soft glow of the streetlight, I kissed him. The days after that night blurred into one another, like smudges on a once clear canvas. I went through the motions, getting up, getting dressed, making breakfast, talking to my husband as if nothing had changed. But everything had. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of that kiss, the touch of his hands, the way his presence had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. Each time I saw my husband, I felt a sickening pang of guilt twist in my stomach. He was kind, gentle, everything I'd once admired. But now, when I looked at him, I saw nothing but the image of the man I had deceived. I could see it in his eyes, the trust he had in me, the love, the belief that we were still everything to each other. How could I betray him like this? But then there were moments when I remembered the other man. How he made me feel seen, how he reminded me of the woman I once was before responsibilities, before the quiet weight of routine had eroded that spark inside me. The conflict inside me raged, and I didn't know where to turn. Each moment with my husband felt like a lie. Each moment with him felt like a betrayal. I couldn't get rid of the images of that night, and it felt like the only thing that mattered. But each time my husband asked me about my day, about anything, I answered with a smile. I spoke to him like everything was fine, even as my heart began to splinter in two. I wasn't living a life. I was existing in the shadow of something that could ruin everything. There was a night when he asked me if I was happy. It was one of those rare moments when we both had time to talk, really talk. We were sitting on the couch, watching a show we used to love, but I couldn't concentrate. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. "You don't seem the same lately," he said, his voice tentative, almost unsure. "Is something bothering you?" The question hung in the air, and I felt the weight of it, heavy and undeniable. Was something bothering me? Yes, everything. I couldn't look him in the eye, so I pretended to be lost in the TV screen. I could feel his gaze on me, the quiet pressure of his attention, and I hated myself for not being honest. "I'm fine," I said, my voice too soft, too unconvincing. "Just tired. Things have been busy." He didn't push it further, and for a moment I almost breathed a sigh of relief. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel his suspicion, the way he was starting to notice the small changes in me. The distance, the way I pulled away from him in moments that had once felt intimate. And I could see it now, the cracks in the foundation of everything we'd built. I thought about the other man again. I thought about the passion, the fire, the way he had made me feel in a way I hadn't felt in years. But I couldn't forget the way my husband looked at me, how much he believed in us, how much he still loved me. What was I supposed to do? How could I make a choice when it felt like I was losing everything no matter what? The days following that conversation with my husband felt like a slow descent into a pit I couldn't climb out of. I had come to resent the moments when he asked me how my day went or tried to make small talk. Every word felt like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. I could feel his unspoken question in the air, hanging between us like a fragile thread. Was something wrong? Did I still love him? I had to look away, to avoid the truth that threatened to burst from my lips. But every time my husband smiled at me, the guilt in my heart doubled. I could see how much he still cared, how much he still wanted us to be the couple we once were. I wanted to scream at him, to confess everything, but something held me back. Something terrified me. Would he still love me once the truth was out? Would he even look at me the same way? I knew the right thing to do was come clean, to confess everything and face the consequences. But what would that accomplish? Would it be the end of us? Or would it be the beginning of something that neither of us could undo? I didn't know. And I wasn't sure I was ready to find out. Then there were the dreams that haunted me every night, vivid and unrelenting. In them, I would stand at a crossroads, unable to decide which path to take. On one side was my husband, waiting for me, hopeful and trusting. On the other was the other man. He was always there, a shadow in the corner of my mind, drawing me closer with his intoxicating presence. I awoke in a cold sweat more than once, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on me. Could I live without the passion that the other man had given me? Could I turn away from him, from that spark, that fire I hadn't felt in so long? Or was my marriage worth sacrificing everything for? One afternoon, I found myself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from him. The other man. "I miss you," it read, simple but laden with meaning. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I felt the pull again. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he was offering. And for the first time in a long while, I wanted it too. But as I stared at the screen, something shifted. The weight of my husband's trust, the way he had always been there for me, crept into my thoughts. I thought about the life we had built together, the years we had spent. What would I be throwing away if I chose the other man? I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. I needed a moment to breathe, to think. But all I could see in my mind was the look on my husband's face, the way he had smiled at me earlier that day, the quiet hope in his eyes. Could I betray him again? Could I live with the consequences? And then the thought came, unbidden and terrifying. What if I already had? I never thought it would come to this. I had convinced myself that I could continue this dual life forever, that I could keep the pieces of my heart separate, carefully tucked away in different compartments. But the truth is, I had already broken. And now, the cracks were impossible to ignore. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, I found myself staring at my husband. He was reading a book, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. His presence was both comforting and suffocating. His love, steady and unwavering, was both a gift and a chain. I couldn't breathe. The words I had been holding in for so long pressed against my throat, desperate to be set free. It was a suffocating kind of silence that had settled between us. I had been hiding, lying, pretending. And the truth was gnawing at me like a wolf, its teeth sharp and unforgiving. He looked up from his book, catching my gaze. His eyes, warm and filled with trust, made my heart ache. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice soft, concerned. But I couldn't answer. I didn't know how. I wanted to tell him so badly. I wanted to shout it out, to confess everything in a single breath and hope that somehow we could find a way to fix it. But the words stuck in my throat like stones weighing me down. And then, unexpectedly, he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "You've been distant lately," he said. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I looked at him, and I felt it, the unmistakable, searing truth of what I had done. My heart broke at the thought of causing him this pain, the pain he didn't deserve. And yet, even as I stood on the edge, looking down at the wreckage I had created, a part of me still hesitated. The other man had awakened something in me that I couldn't deny, something that felt alive in a way my marriage hadn't in years. But how could I betray the man who had given me everything? How could I tear apart the life we had built? I don't know, I finally whispered, my voice barely a breath. The words felt empty, meaningless. He stood up, walking over to me with a calmness that only deepened the ache in my chest. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," he said, taking my hands in his. "But you don't have to carry this alone, you know. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." I couldn't hold it in any longer. The dam inside me cracked, and the flood of guilt and sorrow washed over me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I stared at the man who had been my partner for so many years, the man who had loved me despite all my flaws. "I've made a terrible mistake," I sobbed, my voice breaking as the weight of my betrayal crashed over me. "I've hurt you, and I don't know how to make it right." He didn't pull away. Instead, he held me tighter, his grip firm but gentle, as if trying to anchor me to something that still felt real. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said softly, his voice raw, but there was no anger, only sadness. "But I want to understand. I want to know why you did this." And that was the moment. The truth I had been avoiding. The truth I had kept hidden deep within me. "I don't know either," I whispered, almost to myself. "I don't know who I am anymore." There was no easy resolution. No clean break. Just the quiet acceptance that things had changed, that I had changed. And no matter how much I wished I could turn back time, I couldn't undo what had been done. We sat there, holding each other, neither of us knowing what the future would hold. But in that moment, I realized something. The question wasn't whether I could stay with him or whether I could be with the other man. The question was whether I could forgive myself. And that, perhaps, was the most impossible choice of all.